Are you streaming too
I'm trying to.
from Zoom
Yep.
to YouTube?
Yep. Did it block you?
No.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Okay, I just wondering because I got a notification about going live on Zoom. So
You sound good though.
so in Kansas, so I think in my mind, let's introduce the topic of pushback. Let's talk about all the things that we're seeing across the nation right now, right? Because just recently in Kansas, for example, the Republican legislature just override the governor's veto of banning transgender athletes from playing in or participating in other sports. So that's a right now I think it only impacts like one person, but still. And in Florida, the craziness down there, right? Texas,
Yeah, it is indicative of change, you know.
and I think, and we'll say this, I'll say this too on the when we go live. It isn't the first time. We've seen
No.
this before in the past. We've seen this pushback, blowback, uh, of people trying to do away with whether at that point it was affirmative action, right?
Yep.
Or sensitivity training or gender equity or whatever topic it is. There's been lots of that pushback.
Yep. And it's not heartwarming, but it is a recognition that this stuff is real.
Yes.
And that it's happening.
Yes.
You know. Cool. Yeah, so I don't hear any music at all. Oh, that's me. That's on me. It's good.
Yeah, your Zoom live won't have any music.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had just turned down all the audio on all the stuff. So
Okay.
because I don't like getting that feedback. You know what I'm saying? So Stella got a groove back. So the Blue Beetle,
Did you see the trailer?
Yeah, that was pretty good, huh?
That's gonna be interesting. Yeah, that's gonna be interesting. It's definitely a little bit different from the old DC before James Gunn takeover.
Yep.
You know, does have to me, it does have kind of a Marvel feel to it.
Yeah, it does. It does. But it'll be interesting to see how James Gunn does these things, right? Like,
Hmm.
because you can't not be who you are, which is why like Zack Snyder does the stuff the way he does, because he's Zack. Like,
Yeah, the darker settings and videography that he does. Yeah.
yeah, you know, I don't particularly like all of Zack's stuff because it's so dark and it's hard to see.
Yeah. Like you gotta turn up the brightness on the TV when you're watching it at home.
Right. Like I'm like, what just happened?
Did I miss something?
Who was that?
Yeah.
Boom, boom, ba, bow. Ba, 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 bow. Ba, beep, ba, ba, bow. Ba, bow, 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 bow. Ba, beep, ba, ba, bow. I've got this channel. I've got all this extra static in the line, and I can't figure out where it's coming from. But
were you streaming the Zoom live to the Andre Cohen or to the
Andre Cohen,
okay.
it's in my should be
Gotcha.
in my junk folder kind of thing.
I was intrigued about how it's doing the double live to the same channel,
Yep.
but since you're doing it over there,
Yeah, I'm doing different channels. So
cool. All right. We got about on the live should be about 2 minutes,
okay.
but it is 12 o'clock right now, so we can certainly go.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. I'm gonna switch us over then, and you can go kick us off. Hold on. All right, we're live. Hello, Andre. Welcome
Hey,
to
what's
another
going
week.
on? Yes. And it's so amazing. We're in different parts of the country.
Mhm.
You're now technically, is Kansas the South or is it still Midwest?
Midwest. We are like literally in the center of the lower 48.
Yeah, but I was like, I always get that confused because here in Minnesota, we're clearly the North. Like you can't get much more north than Minnesota. But like you guys are like right close to Missouri, and Missouri's technically in the Midwest, but it's a southern state. Is that fair?
Yeah, but we are also on the northern portion of the state, right? So
Oh, okay.
we're not quite that far south. We're in
Okay.
the area where you've got some people who've got that southern drawl, right?
Yeah.
And then some that do not, and some that
Okay.
have real heavy southern drawl. So it's interesting area zone of the U.S.
Okay. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And so we're going to talk a little bit about pushback in today's conversation, and want to pull up that post we did on LinkedIn. But before we get to that, I think it's important to also recognize that it's April. And April means only one thing.
Tax season?
No, Hmong American History Month.
I'm just kidding. Tax season is important too. So if you haven't done your taxes,
Yeah.
please go do
You
your
better
taxes.
pay your tax because they will come get you, because you are not like some of these other people who only can pay $700 or get refunds. I don't know what a refund look like.
I don't know. I haven't seen a refund in ages. I don't know.
Right. So Laura, will say on the live stream, it looks like we're still in the countdown.
Interesting.
But no, we're there. I always fall behind on that. We're good. You're good. We're good. I always fall behind. I don't know what's going on with my computer, that's the thing. But so yeah, so one of the things that particularly here in Minnesota, folks don't recognize, and maybe in other parts of the world too, the role that the Hmong have played in the United States, and why we would even have a Hmong American History Month, and why particularly here in Minnesota that's important.
So Minnesota, California are the two largest. It's California first, and then Minnesota, and then Wisconsin. So, and Wisconsin lagged a little bit further behind Minnesota, but those are the three large states that have the largest number of Hmong folks that reside there. In the last 10 to 15 years, we've also seen a migration from those three states to southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, Oklahoma, beautiful part of the world or the nation, warm weather, opportunity to buy land, start your own business. There's been turkey operations, chicken operations, egg laying operations, you name it, farming opportunity. That is the roots of especially the older generation Hmong agricultural roots that they have found to be something that they have loved. So you've seen that migration as well. But California, Minnesota, and Wisconsin are probably the largest three. And to your point, Andre, people don't still, I run into people who, when they ask me, so what are you, Laura? What kind of Asian are you? What kind of Asian are you? I'm Hmong, right? And people still say, what's Hmong? Is that like Chinese? Is that like Japanese? Not really. We've got a long history that dates all the way back to China, northern China, some people say and believe. And through persecution and war with the Han Chinese, we were driven out of China into the southern portions of China, and then out of China into the northern mountainous regions of Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Southeast Asia, basically. And then fast forward the French Chinese War that we participated in and supported the French. And then about 10 years later, the Americans came in to Southeast Asia, and what we all know now as the Vietnam conflict or the Vietnam War, right? And because of the dense jungle and not being familiar with jungle warfare, the Americans, the CIA, said, we need someone on the ground to help us navigate. And lo and behold, the Hmong were one of those people that stepped up. And General Vang Pao, who some people may have heard of, if you don't know, go Google him. He's been a huge role model for many. Later in his life, fell into some, things that were good intentions, but had negative impact on his particular stature. But General Vang Pao stepped up, recruited literally boys from the villages throughout Laos at that time to fight in this secret army and rescue downed pilots. Eventually was the guerrilla war troops on the ground, helped with logistics and moving things, troops and tanks and things on the ground. Eventually there were some that learned how to fly alongside of American pilots, right? And so there were huge operations in Laos that was supported by the CIA, ran by General Vang Pao and his Hmong leaders to help fight alongside the CIA and the US and the Americans.
Wow.
You know.
Yeah, no, and thank you for that. Like, particularly again here in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota, where there's a large Hmong community, it's important to know those things, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's important in general to know those, to know a little bit about that history, because those stories oftentimes parallel with others' stories, right? And so the
Mhm.
more we can get to know each other's stories and hear those stories, we can kind of bridge these so-called divides between us. No, really powerful stuff. And there's some iconography that hopefully next week we could go into too, because I think it's really interesting when I'm interacting with the Hmong community, looking at the tapestries and looking
Mhm.
at the artifacts
Mhm.
and what those mean. And so, maybe next week we can talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, we can certainly spend some time there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so, our original topic was really talking about this pushback, and I use this tagline in the LinkedIn article, that pushback is a sign of progress.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you think about that, Laura, what comes to mind for you around this notion that pushback indicates progress? Like, what it seems like that could be an oxymoron almost.
Yeah,
right?
let's take a step back though, right? Historically, and even today, we see pushback even in community, not just within the corporate setting, right? So let's talk about today first, and then we'll zoom back. Is you've got in Florida, for example, pushback against DEIB efforts, all the way up to potential legislation, right, where they're removing or trying to remove teaching of African American history, for example, in colleges and schools. In Texas,
in fraternities, in social fraternities, and in sororities, like, that's isn't that part of the college experience? Like, sorry,
no, and then in Texas, you got the anti-trans, right, movement that's going on there, where the governor there was saying parents cannot talk about, basically, and support their trans kids. You've got here in the state of Kansas, I think I just saw that the Republican legislature override the veto of the governor the veto was to veto the legislation that came through around anti-trans youth participating in sports, right? And so you got movements across the nation that's trying to do away with DIB efforts, but also rights for people who have been marginalized and have been impacted by these inequities historically. And then if you've been following along, Andre and I have talked a little bit about the evolution of this work, DEIB, and back into the old days when this was affirmative action and EOC and the what did we call it? These sensitivity training days, right? There was pushback then too. And you think about affirmative action, there's still some pushback around affirmative action today.
Even like sexual harassment training, why do we have to do that? That's oppressive to me.
Don't guys get sexually harassed? Yeah, that's why we talk about it.
That's why we talk about it.
And then you think about even further back than that, to the days of the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, right? And the movement that was sparked there. even then there was tons of pushback. I think we all have seen the pictures from history.
Yeah. Yeah. So the people's march, right?
Yep.
In I want to get it right. It was the People's Poverty March, where we see those dogs and all that kind of stuff, and many of those folks were kids, right?
Yeah.
And so this is what I think is so weird, or so like strange about like being on the right and wrong side of history, is that, you know, back then, so someone quoted, you know, they were saying, you know, persecution, you know, we're being persecuted like Nelson Mandela. Well, that's interesting, because when Nelson Mandela was in jail, he was jailed because he was a terrorist.
Yeah.
Right. And those are the words that they use. They wouldn't have said domestic at that time, but they just called him a terrorist. Right. Dr. King, by the standards, would be he would have terroristic tendencies. But now he's he's the lamb of justice, right? We all quote him for his content of their character, not color of their skin.
And some of those quotes have been used out of context, but that's another conversation. Another conversation we can have.
Yeah. So this pushback is no stranger to us, right? In this process. And so, you know, we see it in a number of different ways, particularly if you're working within an organization and they've paid you to do things that they don't seem to want to do. Have you ever experienced that, Laura?
I would be lying if I said no. So your original question about is it a sign of advancement, right? And I think it is. And I think of advancement and progress. The progress is what I think you used. I think it is a sign of progress, because if you think back all the way to those days, right, we have progressed. Are we where we want to be? Absolutely not. I would say we are not where we all want to be. We are not at equitable. We are not at, sometimes we're not even at equal, right? But I think we have seen some progress, enough that those in power are afraid enough to let go of whatever real or perceived power they may have, right? Because of the change. And I think that's the progress that we're seeing. And then to your just comment now, there's been many times where the pushback, it comes because I'm trying to push what I thought or assumed you had brought me in to do. And then when I'm pushing too much to advance too fast, there's the whoa, Laura, but I think we just want to do some Heroes on Holidays, and we really don't want to do the hiring practice yet, or the reviewing our policies. We do find there, because our trainings are available to everybody, our development opportunities are available to everybody.
And no, we don't want to put, we don't want to put this on leaders' performance evaluations. It's just, we don't want to make it mandatory. We want people to select, and all of those things there can be some rationale to that, like some healthy and good rationale to that. However, what we're talking about is just really folks trying to stall the process of change, right? Like slowing down the pieces. And one thing I will say about practitioners like ourselves is sometimes we come in with a prima facie, like this is just what you do to be an effective organization. This is just how you interact because it's a good thing to do. Like,
sometimes to us it makes sense, though.
Right, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm getting to. Right, like to us, it's just that prima facie.
Yeah, but it's easy. It makes sense. It's like the basic foundational, quote unquote, DEIB practices that you see in any best practice white paper. You go to Google any source you want, and you'll see some of these basic practices. Yet there's pushback on these basic practices, like data, for example, right? I think you and I both have seen this.
Yeah.
Data that's not available to us, available to HR, even though there are times when we're in HR, but it's available to HR, but not to us.
Yeah.
Right. And people feel like they have to protect that data from us because we're not quite HR, we're not seen as HR, we're not whatever. So data is one that I've seen pushback on, saying, hey, you can't have that. But
Yeah.
the data is what really sets that. Again, it's the foundational, real easy things. You got to have that to be able to build a DEIB program. But there's pushback on even just access to the data.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I do want to come back to us as practitioners, right?
Uh-huh.
So I was setting this thing up. Like for me, it seems very prima facie. It's on the face. It's simple, just straight up. Let's just do this. But sometimes I think practitioners, we come in with that, and we're not. I don't even know if prepared is the right, because I think we're always prepared. Like that's part of the work, right? But sometimes we don't pay enough attention to the change management aspect. And I know we talked about that a little while back, but I just wanted to kind of toss that in here too, because sometimes it can be it's not the pushback is just from the organization. Sometimes it can be because the person presenting it is not operating in a good change management way or perspective, right? So I did want to just throw that out there, because I know we try to be even-handed as much as we can, right? So it's not either or, it's both and more. So there's that. I also think it's interesting that some of that pushback manifests itself in first, slow participation to things, right? So, you've been hired as a diversity person, or you sit on this committee and you're trying to get these things. How have you been successful in helping when folks are trying to do this slow down thing, or slow to participate, or whatnot? What tools have you found to be helpful in encouraging people to want to spend that discretionary effort?
I think part of it, so I jokingly talked about data earlier. I think part of it is data. You got to start to use the data, especially when the slow participation or the pushback is, well, are you sure about that? Yeah, because let me go back to, I quickly brought up, but let me go back to that whole development or training, right? Specifically leadership development. And all of our leadership development programs are available to anybody who wants to participate, and to anybody who can quote unquote qualify for these type of programs. Okay, great, right? That's one way that I've seen, to your point about pushback, that passive pushback. And when we can get at that data and say, you know what, yes, all programs are available to anybody who wants to participate, and look at the numbers and the differences, and look at the availability of people who might be able to participate in those programs, right? So in programs that I've seen in the past, where it's, people who have been in formal leadership roles within the organization for 3 years or more, before they can participate in the organization's formal leadership development program. And that means your 15 years of leadership experience from outside of the organization don't count.
Yep.
Right? You're weeding out a whole bunch of people, regardless of race and gender, who have high potential to be participating in your programs.
Yeah, no, and it's so funny, because we know who the last ones hired and the first ones fired typically are, right? I mean,
right.
the data is clear on that.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, I think, and one of the things that you bring up in that conversation is oftentimes there are unintended consequences
Yeah.
to certain kinds of policies
Correct.
and behaviors in the organization. And I would say that given that, right? So, you need 5 years of experience in this organization before you can become a high potential leader. I would say that that was not designed, and maybe I'm wrong, but I would estimate that they were thinking, with the most positive of intentions, but that small policy can have some
Huge impact.
adverse,
Yeah.
unintended consequences given how that's set up,
Yeah.
particularly given the data of who's hired last and who gets fired first, kind of thing, right?
And being that the younger generation are much more racially ethnically diverse, right? So to your point about hired last, fired first, it's not even about being fired, it's about having the opportunity. So the younger generations are much more racially ethnically diverse, and so if they're coming in, even if with experience from outside, and they're coming into your organization and that's your policy, they have no chance of accessing that particular training or leadership development until year 3 to 5 of their service. And then we also know that most of the times employees of color are leaving within that first 1 to 3 years, right? And that's not just one particular organization, that's organizations I've seen over and over again. And so if that's the case, you can't even keep them long enough for them to even transition into your programs that has that gateway to actually even enter. So again, that's why, to me, if we can start to see the data and share people who are pushing back, whether it is actively pushing back or passively pushing back by their way of designing these programs, right? Now we can say, yeah, that's a great intention, that it's designed where anybody can access, but your design of anybody can access and being passive about having people access it, right, has these negative impact on these particular populations. So what if we designed it this way?
Right.
Could we increase the numbers? So I think that's one way that I've been able to push back on the pushback, or whether it's active or passively designing programs that are leaving out certain people.
Yeah. And I think you also brought up another point that I think is important for us to recognize is that once I've gotten the information
Mhm.
that a program isn't yielding a program or policy or a process isn't yielding my intended or desired results, and I get that feedback via data, via survey,
Yep.
quantitative or qualitative data,
Yep.
I have to then look at myself or have the organization look at itself and be humble enough to entertain that my perspective and my paradigm and my worldview is not shared among the folks that I needed to be shared
Yeah.
with. And I think people are resistant oftentimes to that process of humility to say, maybe we're not getting it right on this. We get it right on so many other things, but maybe on this thing we didn't get it right. So let's try to wrestle with that.
I think it's also that's only one person's experience, right? How many times have we heard that, right? Oh, that's only that person's experience, that they can't get into the program, or that they are feeling that way about whatever it is. Until, to your point about the qualitative data, is now if you listen to the collective voices and they are now sharing, all of them are sharing similar experiences. Now it's not just one person's experience. People can't just write it off as such. it is something with the system, it is something with the policy that now we have to change to create that access that's much more equitable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the let's explore that you posted on LinkedIn. You talked about posting on the LinkedIn the pushback, right? And what it and I think you were alluding to this with that comment is, how do we start to understand the reasons for why people are pushing back? Whether it is they just don't, one I've talked about, they just don't have the line of sight to the data, the real impact, the qualitative, quantitative data, that how it's impacting the people, right? But what are some of those? How do we start to understand the reasons for people pushing back on DEIB initiatives or tactics?
Yeah. So one of the ways that I certainly try to do that, particularly when I see it, is to confront it
Mm,
face forward, right? Like just really say, I'm noticing there's some pushback on this. What might be some of the rationale of it?
sure.
Because this is something that is in our strategic plan. It's part of our thing, I think confronting it. Now, you don't have to be as forward as I am when I do that, but I think addressing that there's a gap between, we say we want this, but we're seeing this. So how do we close that gap? And I think a lot of folks get intimidated by that process, right? Both the people receiving those questions, as well as those who have to bring the question up, because nobody wants to be the Debbie Downer. So I think that's one way to do it. What's another way that you've seen be effective?
I think the addressing it straight up has always been, to me, the most effective if it is a known and or acknowledged pushback, right? But so why I say that is, oftentimes what I've ran into is the passive, what I talked about earlier, the passive pushback of, it seems to be that person or that group of people are on board with the DEIB efforts,
Yeah.
right? And this is, I guess, another way of pushback, I guess, and identifying it is, they are seemingly on board with the DEIB efforts. In your meetings, they're part of your leadership council, they're part of your committees, they're part of your work groups that are trying to push for DEIB efforts. And so they are seemingly helping advance the effort along, but there's some passive resistance to it, right? Where they become they probably become the barriers to it, because they are also the key influential and or power that needs to get you need to get the okay from before you move forward with some of your initiatives, right? And so for me, when it's those individuals who are seemingly are on board, that are pushing back and passively, whether they know it or not, are pushing back, it is getting them actually coming to help or feel like they're creating the solutions, right? So I know, for example, I'll use, I've been in healthcare DEI work for a while, right? So if I get pushback from a nurse leader, let's just see, I'm going to use that as an example. Well, I'm not a nurse, so I need your help, right? Help me understand how we can get DEI into the nursing ranks. I know that you have folks who are not 1.0 FTEs. You got folks who are 0.2 to 0.5 to 0.8. I also know that your nurse managers have span of controls of anywhere from 50 to 100 plus, right? And some of those folks they never see until like 3 months where that individual comes in for one shift, So help me understand if we were to roll something out, and let me use training, like learning, for example. We want to roll a training or a learning out to your nursing staff. How might that work? What does that look like? What has been effective in the past for you, right? And outside of DEI, whether it is, communication training or nursing specific clinical training, how has that worked, and how might we be able to mimic what has worked in the past? And that's how I've been able to bring those leaders who are on board, but seemingly are on board because they are gatekeeping a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And so they become helping create the solution. And when you go back to them and say, okay, I've thought about it, and I've thought about what you said about what works with nursing, and how about we chunk it up into 3 10-minute bites, and I'll help your nurse manager, right? With a tool that they can take back and lead their conversations with their staff in 3 opportunities, 10 minutes each.
Yep.
Now it is exactly what they had asked us to do.
Yep.
Right. And so now it becomes harder for them to push back and say, well, that won't work in our organization or our department because, we don't have much time. Well, this is actually what you told me that works in the past.
Yeah.
And I think that's how I've been able to get, especially learning, into those departments that have been a little bit more difficult or pushing back on that.
Yeah. When I was listening to you, I had to write this down.
Mm-hmm.
Is take away excuses.
Yeah.
As much as possible, right? So don't you as a practitioner be the barrier that they can blame for this not working. His stuff is too long. It doesn't fit in our time frame, or that initiative takes too much time. The other thing that I think is interesting with that is, and I heard you say, help them problem solve, right? Yeah. So help this is not a Andre thing, and it's not a Lore thing. This is the organization's thing. So this is not my problem. This is our challenge. This is our opportunity, right? I think that perspective taking and that's perspective granting or clarification really can help do those 2 things. So make sure that it's an organizational challenge or opportunity, that we eliminate as many obstacles as we actually can to that process. So if you only have 5 minutes, then we'll do the trainings in 5-minute increments, but you have to do 5-minute increments, right?
And I would say early on in my career, I had problems with this, right?
Come on now.
You too?
Yeah.
Right. So, what do you mean you don't have 30 minutes? What do you mean we can't? What do you mean you can't shut down? What do you mean? You said this is an organizational priority. Why aren't you making it a priority? Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And you should be doing this. And this is why you should be doing. And people are slowly going, I hear no evil. I see no evil. And then you find yourself on an isolated island, isolated by yourself, alone.
And you're frustrated, right? You're frustrated about why am I even here? If they say they want to do this, but now they don't want to do this and they do not being flexible. Well, I think that's the biggest piece about, especially for those of you who are listening, who are early in your DEIB career, is flexibility. Biggest thing that has helped me in my career, whether it is about the data, it is about learning, it is about development opportunities for others. It's about how do you become flexible enough to be able to mold what you have to offer and shift, bob and weave, and to help that particular leader or that function or that department with their business issue with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging efforts.
Yeah. Yeah. And recognizing that you have many tools at your disposal, right? So one tool is if they, if they're involved with receiving federal dollars, is the EEOC, right? And the affirmative action. If you're in an education institution, the same thing happens, right? If you're if you if you're not in those settings and you're in a private corporation and they don't have any dealings with federal dollars, you have the values of that organization or the mission of that organization, and really tying those things back to those key components can help keep you on track. One of the things I think that can be a distractor and a detractor, and I'm not I'll just say it, is sometimes we get caught up in the social justice pieces when in fact we should be, and there's space for that and there's context for that, but we have to understand what those spaces are and what that context is. But often folks are going after the social justice aspect before thinking about, is my organization ready to take on some of those things, or is that even our priority?
That's what I was going to say.
Given. Yeah, go ahead.
Yep, that's what I was going to say. Is it the priority of the organization and the leadership? And if that's not our priority when it comes to, quote unquote, social justice or anti-racism or whatever term you want to use, let's build that foundation around DEIB, and then we can move to a conversation around racism or social justice. And then there are, so going back onto your point about EOC, affirmative action, there's that stuff. But then some institutions, and depending on the type of institution you are, there's accreditation, right?
Oh, that's right.
There's, in your field, in your industry, there are some accreditation standards that may require you to be at certain levels, or to be providing certain things to your employees and to your clients and customers, right? If you're what is it? Oh gosh.
If you have a license, right? I mean, if you have a license, you have to get ethics, oftentimes ethics and bias training. If you're in law enforcement, particularly since here in Minnesota, the George Floyd Act, there are certain units on working with diverse communities. It's crouched in a number of different ways. Teachers have to do it, nurses, physicians. So there are ways to even get into the professional organizations that your staff are in, because I imagine that most of those have some kind of ethics and bias training, or just for their licensure or their journeyman status. You're right.
Yeah. So that's one way, right? So in the third thing in the article, we talked about addressing pushback with training, right? You and I have talked about training doesn't work by itself, but I think training is a great foundation to creating the cultural change we need or we are seeking. So talk a little bit about how do we address pushback with training?
Yeah, I think, so first of all, I think the accelerator program that we've put together is an excellent opportunity to kind of delve into how do you get that for yourself, and then how do you use that in an organization. So that's a shameless plug for our accelerator program. And we don't have the QR code up here today, but you'll see it in the notes. But I think the first thing that is really important is that we have a sound foundation about what we're talking about, right? And so it is my belief that people oftentimes don't do, not because they don't want to, but they don't understand or have not been taught what it is that they are expected to do.
Yeah.
And I think, level setting those expectations through training. And sometimes, we call it training when it's not really, I mean, that's what we have to call it because that's what the industry calls it. But in some cases, it is just about having consistent conversations. It is about, exploring new possibilities. And so I think that that's something that we have to take into account when we talk about addressing that pushback in that way, and making sure that I know that from my classroom, my K-12 experience, that I can bring in a special guest from the community to come in and say something that I've been saying all year. And my students will say, oh, I get it. And I'm like, talking about, I say that all the time, so recognizing that it sometimes could be us, they can be deaf to us, right? Or the programs that we do. So we have to mix it up and bring in some new voices and new perspectives.
I like what you said about setting up those expectations and not stopping there, but showing people how to behave differently, right? Because many organizations, especially in the last 2 to 3 years, have said, yep, diversity is important. Yep, inclusion. Yep, equity. Yep, belonging. We even have it on our values and part of our mission and our vision and whatever, our goals. And they stop there.
Yep.
Right. And that's the problem is, yes, you have it on your vision and your mission and your values, but what does that mean for people? How do you expect people to behave differently? Right. And if you go back to the old, I know you're an OD guy, so if you go back to the old change management practices, how do you freeze, unfreeze, and refreeze those behaviors? Right?
That's Kurt Lewis for you. Kurt Lewis for you. What? Look, old school. It was old.
Old school, it was but new. It works.
It was new. Then it was old, and now it's new again.
Yes, right? It is.
No, yeah. So I think that I think that those are. So, and I may have told this story last week too. So I'm getting old, so I do this a lot. So I apologize. But I think it's interesting that we will be quick to label people and slow to understand people, right? So that person is,
say that again.
That person is racist, or that person is, homophobic. Okay, that's the easy part, right?
Yeah.
What do you think they would say their challenge is? Right? Or how do you think they would respond if they actually heard or would they want to be engaged with your process? And so I think part of it is recognizing, and I do know that there are some just evil people. There's just evilness. I'm not going to pretend like it's not. But I would suggest that the majority of people are trying to do the right thing. They just oftentimes don't know what to do. And so we have to give them grace and accountability. I'm gonna get that on my knuckles, grace and accountability, right?
There's a
so
when you walk in the room, people are thinking, all right, am I gonna get grace today, or am I gonna get
right, like, but they are a pair. I'm like, no. So
too funny.
Yeah,
I remember. I think an old gentleman practitioner you and I both used to know. I don't know if he's even around anymore. Remember Pat Herndon?
Oh yeah. Look, Pat was my mentor, even if he didn't know he was my mentor. Like, I just made him. I was like, "You're gonna be my mentor." And
so if anybody's listening and knows Pat Herndon, and if he's still around, you should give a shout out to him. But I remember one time We were talking to him, and he said something about when he walks in, people know they're in trouble. So when you talked about accountability and grace, that made me think of good old Pat Herndon.
Yeah.
Uh,
No,
but
because what and I mean I think that's a really interesting piece, because a lot of times people think that grace is soft.
yeah,
Like you're just letting people get away with stuff, that you're not, you don't have any standards. No, I have standards and I have things, but I'm looking at the overarching goal of my interaction with them.
yeah.
And can I get them there if I'm constantly giving them accountability? Right? Like, no, I need to give some grace to, but go ahead.
No, so recognizing time is running out on us. The last piece on the article is speaking of, and this is a great transition, holding leaders accountable, right? So we've told them this is the values and this is what we will expect. We've shown them how to behave and how to be good, inclusive leaders. Now, to freeze in those new behaviors, we have to hold them accountable. So what does that accountability look like, whether it's to leaders and sometimes I would say even to the individual person within that institution, right? Because, in many organizations, people say, well, we're all leaders. Well, if we're all leaders and DEI is supposed to be, and B is supposed to be all of our efforts and all of our responsibilities, what does that look like, Andre?
It looks like Jerry Maguire. Show me the money. Right. So I don't know if it did I age myself with that.
I don't know.
Right? But so two things. I think we have to have some fiscal and financial accountability and structure associated with DEI efforts, right? So that's either allocations, either in a department, in departments, a dollar spend. I think that's important because money flows. No, I don't think that works. Anyway, but I think paying attention to that, but when possible, tying those things to bonuses. That's probably an extreme.
And that's probably in a more developed institution that's been doing some work for a while, right?
Yep. And so I would say that's, kind of on this higher development end, but I would say kind of in the middle of this bell curve, if you will, would be things like having a scorecard where leaders score themselves, or as a leadership team, the leadership team scores itself on how many DEI communications they send out, right? That doesn't have anything to do with money. How frequently they appear, or they talk with their teams, or their managers talk to their teams about DEI initiatives, looking at the participation rate per department or whatever, right? So, we talked about data before. In terms of leaders, those are individuals who we can hold accountable to that data, looking the way the organization has said it wants to look, right?
And it's important that you bring up those pieces, because it's important for especially early DEIB practitioners and organizations that are early in their DEIB journey, okay, to really think about it from a checklist mentality. What do I mean by that? This month, did I, as a leader, bring one DEIB conversation to my team? Yep, check. Did I, as a leader, right, as the communications leader, did we make sure that there are diversity in the pictures that we went through to this month? Check. Those are the early ways that we can start to build behaviors into people who don't behave that way yet. right? And I've done this from
Yep.
even from a health equity perspective where, practitioners, clinicians are not quite versed in health equity and disparities yet. Did you disaggregate your data by race, ethnicity, gender, language? Yes, check. Did you see that there are differences? Yes, check. If there are no differences, can you explain why there are not any differences? Yes, check, right? And so even early on, this checklist mentality, it may seem cumbersome and it may seem like, oh, you're giving me extra work, but it's part of the behavior change process. Because I think we talked about this last time with change management is that third H of the 4H change model, right? The hands piece, people want to do something right now. So that checklist is something for them to do so that you can, in the long term, hold people accountable for their behaviors.
And when we think about any kind of change that we're doing as human beings, right? I start a new hobby. I have a checklist.
Yeah.
Right. So whether it's watching the YouTube and I'm watching step by step what they do in the YouTube, or I actually have a literal checklist, or I'm starting an exercise program, I'm following, there's some checklist that I'm following that's either, printed or a concept. And, we look at pilots, they live by those checklists.
Correct.
And if anything is not right on that checklist, then we're not leaving. This plane's not going, right? So, I think the same kind of thing can be said. And some folks may say, well, I'm beyond checklists, or we should be beyond. Probably right? But pilots do it every day. They should be beyond that. But I'm glad they're not. Because they get it right enough times for me to get safely to my destination and back.
It's
and
working.
It doesn't matter who the pilot is, right? So it's working. So so I think that is something that's really important to recognize, that this particularly, and as organizations grow in this space, some things become more routinized and then they become habitual. But first we've got to we've got to get those checklists. We've got to do those things. And I am in support of heroes and holidays first. Correct. Before we start talking about the great injustices, because if we don't start dealing with those heroes and holidays, we can't tell what the appetite is for these bigger conversations, right? So I'm all about the brown bags and all those things, and the
lunch and learn webinars. And so let's talk about the next time. How do we move from, or why the importance of heroes and holidays?
Yep.
Right. And how do we move from heroes and holidays to organizational change and accountability around DEIB?
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, let's talk about that next time, because we've brought up heroes and holidays a couple times, and it may be something new concept to people. Some people may be familiar with it already. And my guess is there's a lot of organizations who are there where it's still heroes and holidays. And it's certainly good. It's a good starting point, but let's talk about that. How do you move from heroes and holidays to a space in where it is becoming part of and integrated into the fabric of your organization and the practices and policies and processes and any other P's you want to throw out there?
Yeah. No, okay, let's do that. So I'll work on something and we'll try to get it up on LinkedIn. I'm really excited that we're having this conversation, that people are joining the conversation. And we're getting lots of great feedback, and this is just fun.
So it is 12:55 already. That means we got 5 minutes left, and we always have to do our closing, right? So if you are watching us, whether it is live or you are watching the recording of this, certainly follow us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube, like, share, comment, do whatever you want with the video and send it to other people. To Andre's left, there's a QR code. If you want to scan that, there is a QR other way. Maybe you're right then. Okay. There is a QR code that you can scan to access a PDF about the services and what we provide and what we do for organizations and how we support, especially those what we call DIB practitioners that are walking alone, right? And
Yep,
so
yep,
how do
yep.
we, how do we as DIB practitioners, longtime practitioners, help individuals who are coming into this space new or working by themselves and
Yeah.
don't have the financial capacity from their organizations to support them? So how do we help you in doing that as well? So there's a PDF that you can scan that QR code and download and view as well. But next time we're going to talk about moving from heroes and holidays
Yeah.
to integrated DEIB practices and processes and policies. Anything else, Andre?
No, I think that's it, Laura. Again, I just encourage folks to hit that QR code. For those practitioners who are alone, you don't have to be alone. And so we look forward to engaging with you and helping you on your journey. So, and a lot of times people say, "Well, who's the audience for this stuff? Who are you after?" Actually, this is for us. Because we were once in those shoes, right? And so it's important for us to be able to share what we've learned from a real practical standpoint. So cool. Well, I think all minds are clear, and I want to say thank you for a wonderful conversation, Laura. I'll see you next week.
For live viewers?
Oh, that's good. So apparently, the last time we were on, we had quite a few viewers, but I don't know where they came from because I didn't see them. So I don't know if they were watching in the
Interesting.
in the chat or whatever. So I got a couple of emails from folks last time. So
When do you want to invite, what's her name? Lancy?
yeah, so let me make sure. Let me stop all the stuff before we talk about that. So I'm still streaming over in my other YouTube channel. Let me end it and then call you back.